Greetings and welcome to my introduction to my new novel under the snappy title, How a Pre-Raphaelite Artist Saved the Rosetta Stone. Some of you will know me. I'm Peter Thomas. I'm a retired clergyman and now live in Somerset. And it had always been my intention to write a novel. There's a long tradition of saying that everybody has a book in them. I had no intention of writing a second novel. But I'd enjoyed the process. I can't say I've sold masses of copies, but I wanted to explore a different idea. And when I retired, I'd undertaken a master's degree in art history, and my dissertation was on the Rosetta Stone. And it was an object that had fascinated me from very early on, as we'll see in a few moments. And I came across a quote in a book about the Rosetta Stone, which said this: Henry Salt, who was in 1815 the British Consul General in Cairo, obtained permission to dig at the fortification of Burg Rashid, hoping to discover the missing Rosetta fragment. And most of you will know that the Rosetta Stone is incomplete. So I wanted to produce a story that looked at not only the history of the Rosetta Stone, that's well known, but also some of the aspects of that story which might not be quite so well known, and weave around that a story. And so I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation, which is going to be used when the book is formally launched on the May the 1st. If anybody is interested in joining in that launch, then please contact me at pthomas5@aol.com. So we're going to go into sharing this presentation that will be used on that night. Musicians often talk about their difficult second album, usually based on great success of their first. What are they going to do? Some of you will have read A Body in Westminster Abbey, a Victorian murder mystery. It was published just over a year ago. And again, Westminster Abbey was something I knew quite a lot about. I'd done a chaplaincy there for 25 years. But here I am receiving my first copies of my new novel just a few weeks ago. And indeed, not only did I receive that, but on the same day, my wife had her book of short stories published. Winter Moonlight. She's already published 2 or 3 other novels. But how a Pre-Raphaelite artist saved the Rosetta Stone, a 21st century mystery, and I claim solved by me. My first encounter with the Rosetta Stone was way back in 1966. I went on a school visit from Dr. Morgan's Grammar School in Bridgewater, where I was in beginning of my second year, I think. And Mr. Hammond, who took us on that tour, didn't just haphazardly let us loose to view the tens, hundreds of thousands of articles there. We had 5 particular things we were going to look at: the Portland vase, Sutton Hoo treasure, the Elgin marbles. The Portland vase, famous because some mad person had come along and smashed it, and it had been put back together sometime in the 19th century. The Sutton Hoo treasures from Suffolk, not far from where my in-laws lived, made famous in more recent times by the Netflix film about the dig. And the Elgin marbles, still very much in the news, taken by Lord Elgin from the Parthenon, and strong campaigns to have them restored. But there were 2 other, maybe not quite so well-known items: the Codex Sinaiticus and the Rosetta Stone. The Codex Sinaiticus is the oldest copy of the Bible virtually in the world. It was found in the 19th century in a monastery on Mount Sinai. It was bought by the British Museum from Russia, and it's on display today, not in the British Museum, but in the British Library. And the fifth item was the Rosetta Stone, a photograph here that I took a couple of years ago of its display in the British Museum. I've also included the names of all the boys in that class of 1966 at Dr. Morgan's school as mainly minor characters in the story. They don't reflect the individuals, but it was useful to have, in a sense, a random list of names to use. And my book explores the various stories of the Rosetta Stone and is in four different sections. There is an unveiling. We'll hear more about that in a moment. There is a story as told. There are many books written about the Rosetta Stone. There's then the untold story. I've gone a bit deeper and explored some of the other possibilities of what might have happened, both in the 19th century and in the 20th and 21st centuries. And it concludes with a story that could not be told. And we'll learn a bit more about that again in a little while. So the story starts with the unveiling of the stone in October 2026 outside the British Library. So why is it there? And why is it so much larger? And the story as told has five main sections. We go back to the 2nd century BC. We go to the end of the 18th century, the start of the 19th century, and then in the 20th and 21st centuries. And then the untold story is in two longer parts. Firstly, in the 19th century, involving Egyptian explorers or explorers in Egypt, like Henry Salt, who was briefly our kind of ambassador there, about British politics and issues in England. It also includes references to the royal family and to trips undertaken to Egypt and Israel. And then in the 21st century, it looks at new discoveries, intrigue, various attitudes of museums, the government, and some difficult historical and ethical issues. And the story that could not be told, set in 2030, rounds off the novel. But let's, for those of you who may not know quite so much, an introduction to the Rosetta Stone. Here it is, or as much as it as we have today. This is what it might have looked like when it was originally created. So the first part of the story of the stone is the 2nd century BC, around 196 BC, when the stone is created. And it's agreement by Ptolemy V. He was a Greek-speaking, he was a teenager. He inherited the throne from his father, Ptolemy IV. Ptolemy's took on Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great, near Alexandria. He divided his empire, as it were, and the Ptolemies took over Egypt. So the agreement is made between Ptolemy and the priests of the Egyptian cult, as it were. And it was widely distributed. Multiple copies were made. And significantly, it was written in 3 different languages. And the agreement essentially said, you treat me as a god, and I'll let you off some taxes. There's lots more details than that. But it was a crude way of trying to prevent too much conflict in Egypt. So the treaty was signed at a place called Memphis at the bottom of this map. It was the headquarters of the Egyptian cult, of the Egyptian priests, a long way from the area ruled by the Greek dynasty of Ptolemy, which was based around Alexandria. Giza marked on there is where the pyramids are, just south of Cairo. And that place, Sais, is probably where what we call the Rosetta Stone was put up outside of a temple. But it was found at a place called Rosetta on the coast. And the second part of the story takes us to that coast. There was an Anglo-French conflict in Egypt, part of the Napoleonic Wars. Nelson was vaguely involved as well. The stone had been taken from Sais and used as a building block in, I think, about the 15th, 16th century. But it was 1898, it was discovered because Napoleon's troops were trying to build a fort to defend the coast. But with the defeat of Napoleon, everything that they had found was passed over to the British, and it was brought to London in 1902, and it was donated to the British Museum nominally by George III, where it's been displayed evermore here at the museum. On the side of the Rosetta Stone, captured in Egypt by the British Army, 1801. The third part of the story is the early 19th century, the deciphering of the hieroglyphs. Because on the stone, there were three different languages. There were hieroglyphs, there was demotic, which is a kind of cursive written form of hieroglyphs, and Greek, and also a declaration that they all said the same thing. Here are some of the hieroglyphs, some of the demotic text, some of the Greek text. So what is a hieroglyph? It technically means a sacred carving. They were symbols, and it was unknown whether the symbols represented ideas or words or sounds. So how was it deciphered? Well, they identified a cartouche like this, and the places where it was written in the hieroglyphs identified it as representing Ptolemy, the name of the king, in this sort of form. So they were able to identify what some of the symbols might sound like. And how was it deciphered? It was deciphered very slowly over a period of some 20 years, particularly involving two people, Thomas Young and a man called Jean-Francois Champollion. There was, to this day, quite a controversy about the contribution that they both might have made. Thomas Young was English, Champollion was French. But it took them about 20 years. Here they are, Thomas Young on the left-hand side. The fourth story of the stone is how it became an icon of the British Museum. People would gather around it. First time I saw it, it was on a sloped line like this. It's been stood upright since about 1990. If you go into the museum, this is the main directions. The reality is the first place they direct you to, immediately opposite what there says the collection shop, is the Rosetta Stone, where that central four is in that gallery. That's the Egyptian gallery. Everything else in the Egyptian gallery, from the bottom to the top, is in chronological order and effectively facing you as you make your way through the gallery. But the Rosetta Stone is not only out of chronological order, it's out of physical alignment. It faces that side entrance. It's the only place in the museum where you can look all the way around an object and there's a designated space to do it. And the museum, I believe, has exploited it. So you can buy anything. This was taken during late COVID times, masks, sanitation. You could buy cups and mugs and jackets and coats and gloves, key rings. About half the merchandise for sale in that room is material related to the Rosetta Stone. And the fifth part of the story, as normally told, is from the 21st century, the debate about repatriation, location. Where should the Rosetta Stone be? Here's a stone again. And a contemporary day arguments about whether it should go back to Egypt, how it was acquired, what its legal possession position might be, debating moral and political issues, looking at the history of Egypt. Often it's being compared, as people do in this novel, with the Benin bronzes or the Parthenon stones. And one of the things that the story explores are issues to do with that. But the untold part is what I explore in this book. And it begins by looking at various Egyptian explorers. So here we have Henry Salt. He was effectively our first ambassador in Egypt. He was there in the early part of the 19th century. He had a significant role to play. And he was the one who wanted to go to Rosetta to find the missing parts of the stone. He was accompanied by this exotic Giovanni Belzoni, one of the great stories in terms of exploring Egypt in the 19th century. He was a giant of a man. His initial career was as a strong man, but he also had a good idea of physics and mechanics, and he was employed to move the head, I think, of Ramesses II along the, the Nile and brought back to London, described by Shelley as being Ozymandias, that head, and a good relationship, but sometimes it turned sour with Henry Salt. They both operated for a while around the pyramids, and they play a significant part in this story. But the Crimea War is threatening in the middle of the 19th century, and Prince Albert has a particular concern for the cultural artifacts in the Middle East, and also a particular concern for the people of St. Petersburg. Now, my wife has written a novel, we hear about that in a moment, but one of the artists at the time was a man called William Cave Thomas. He painted this painting, which hangs on the wall of our house. It's a picture of my wife's great 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 grandfather who managed to embezzle quite a lot of money out of a bank. Uh, she's written two books, one about John Durden, the embezzler, and the second, A Citadel of Ice, about a journey to St. Petersburg made by William Cave Thomas, this artist. And that features in part in my story. But as does a trip to Egypt and Israel by the famous Pre-Raphaelite artist William Holman Hunt. And the story also involves his girlfriend, sometime fiancée, Annie Miller. Annie Miller, who he found as an illiterate teenager working in a pub, but he, like many of the Pre-Raphaelites, loved her stunning hair, um, and was going to try to bring her up to become his wife. And we learn something of their relationship. She got painted by one of the Pre-Raphaelites, by Millet. She got painted by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. She got painted also by Holman Hunt in The Awakening Conscience, but she features in this story, as does Thomas Seddon. Thomas Seddon was a less well-known artist, but he joined Holman Hunt on his journey to Egypt and to Israel. But in my account, he was also quite closely involved with the royal family. As we know, as we know, Cave Thomas was, because Cave Thomas and his father had rehung many of the royal portraits. Whilst he's in Egypt, he paints the scapegoat, or at least begins to. The only picture he actually completes, Holman Hunt, whilst he's in Egypt, is the Afterglow of Egypt, which is now available in two different forms in different art collections. But we hear something about his adventures and his encounters in Egypt and then in Israel. But also part of the untold story is in the 21st century with new discoveries, intrigues involving various museums, particularly the British Museum and the Ashmolean, involving the government, involving some difficult historical and ethical issues. And the book explores some of those. There is a conclusion that leads to the unveiling, but the story is only fully understood when, in 2030, the involvement of a major international figure who died in 2023 is discovered. Sometimes people can ask about sources for novels, mainly research material from my dissertation on the Rosetta Stone for that master's degree. I say, why waste a year's work? But histories of the British Museum, biographies of Holman Hunt and other Pre-Raphaelites, biographies of Henry Salt, books looking at issues to do with repatriation. And that's where the story ends. Like my first book, it's just been a real joy just exploring ideas, exploring history. It's also set as was the body in Westminster Abbey in the middle of the 19th century, but here spans rather more history as well. So I do hope this has somewhat whetted your appetite. I think it's a tells both an important story. It deals with some important issues. It brings together significant characters, and I propose a particular resolution to the issues, and that resolution is exposed in the first chapter. But the rest of the book explores how they got to that point. So if you are able to join us for the book launch on May the 1st, then you'd be very welcome. Just get in touch with me. I say at pthomas5@aol.com. Or if you wish to order the book, then you can do so through Amazon. And there it's £8.99. And if you spend more than £10 on any other books, then there's postage free. Or if you want it directly from me, then be in touch. For you, it'll be £7.99 plus postage, which would be about £10. But I hope you've enjoyed this introduction, and I look forward to hearing from you or seeing you.